Amen. What is a great pleasure for me to have my good friend Ryan. Ryan, how are you, buddy?
I am doing really well, Hassan. It's nice to finally talk to you face to face as we've been chatting for years through social media, and we never had a real one-on-one conversation. So no, I was happy when you asked me to do it. I appreciate it.
Right. Actually, we were talking before started recording. I think we started knowing each other when we had Bret Hart Forum, like when the DVD came out around 2005. That was
Right.
quite fun.
It was. We had some good discussions on there, and the Lace Brett brothers were two characters. They were hilarious. Which I just watched your interview with them today. It was really good. So
Yeah, we still keep in touch with them as well. And we had, if you remember, Tech now he's a wrestler in NXT UK as well.
yeah, it's great to see him doing well, and he's got a good look for wrestling. He's got a unique look too, and I haven't seen too much of his work. I haven't watched a ton of NXT lately, but I got to check him out, and I wish him the best. It's cool to
Yeah,
see because I remember when we first started talking, he was just going to, I think, the train with Lance Storm. So it's good to see how far he's come.
that's true. That's true. Hey, I remember you like were making a lot of cool banners like for the forum and stuff. Are you still doing these things or?
Uh, I dust off the Photoshop skills every now and then for my work, but not for anything wrestling related anymore. No, but that used to be fun back in the day. I used to enjoy that, but I haven't made anything like that in a while.
I still remember the Money Inc. banner you made it. You remember for the pro wrestling forum?
Yeah, and I think it had like Brett's little flame design on his tights going across the side, if I remember right.
Right.
Yeah, no, that was fun back in the day.
And you made the TDBRC and IRS banner for yourself. I still remember it.
Yep, yeah, I've always been a Money Inc. fan. I always thought they were an underrated team.
Right. I think you yesterday we were exchanging texts and you said Mike Rotunda was actually an underrated wrestler.
He was always a solid wrestler. I mean, he was never going to be a top of the card guy, but he never really had a like a you watch the match like, oh, that was terrible. You could put him in against anybody; he'd always give you a really solid middle of the card match. So I could see where his son gets his skills from. He was technically very solid, I thought.
Yep, he's quite good, but I think sometimes he comes across as like too basic. If I am making sense, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he was kind of your traditional, early '90s sort of heel character. He
Right.
wrestled for that, but then again, he is wrestling in suspenders and dress shoes, dress attire. So we got to cut him a little slack, I guess.
That's true. I've been looking forward for this interview because I always love your takes on wrestling, like you have different takes. For example, lately, like you sent me a link to a Madison Square Garden show from 1993, and like you listed the roster and you said it was quite good, and it made me think, yeah, it was a quite good times.
It was. I was thinking back when I knew we were going to do this interview, and I looked back. There's a good site. I think it's called Wrestling Data, and they have results from all across from the '70s all the way to present of house shows, pay-per-views, Raws. And I was looking at some of the shows I went to, like toward the Attitude Era. Then I looked at some of the shows I went to in the New Generation era. And I know the New Generation era takes a lot of heat from fans, and even WWE puts out the narrative of like this is sort of like the black sheep of our history. But I look at the rosters, I'm like the Attitude Era roster. I look at the cards, like that was a terrible card. And then I look at some of the New Generation cards, like the one I sent you the other day. It had great matches on there. It had Mr. Perfect and Ric Flair. Brett was on there. He's working Bam Bam, which it was their typical match, but it's still a fun match to watch. You
Right.
had Razor on there, Backlund. There was a lot of talent. Sean was on that card.
That. Hey, speaking of Bam Bam and Brett, did you see their Osaka match?
I had never seen that one. It's a fan cam.
It is the fan cam. It is from the same tour that it has the Brett and Savage match. And you know what stands out about the Brett Bigelow match? Like two things. I think Bigelow had quite a career in Japan. So, like, despite he's a heel, but the Japanese starting to cheer Bigelow on the match. So it added like a quite cool twist. And they didn't have the victory roll finish.
That was pretty much the finish to every match I've ever seen of there. What was the finish of that?
I think it was the sharpshooter.
Oh, I'll have to check. You'll have to forward me that one when we're done talking. I'll have to check that out. I've never seen that.
I'm not sure it is online, but I have it on tape somewhere. Like there
I
is
love the match with Savage from that tour. The
yeah,
babyface match was a great match. I wish they had a better version of that recorded somewhere, better video quality.
that is a very good match as well.
Right.
As we are speaking about you, like you was talking about the Attitude Era. For me, maybe it was kind of cultural shock because I used to watch wrestling with my grandparents and with my family, and they are a little bit conservative when it comes when the Attitude Era it was a little bit too much. So I was kind of uncomfortable watching like the Sable and the Debra stuff with them. We were used to the tag team wrestling. I'm not sure. Although it was a huge era for everybody saying that's their favorite era, but I didn't enjoy it quite much. How about you?
At the time I did. I was into it as much as anybody in the Stone Cold and the Rock, but a lot of it was just shock TV, like Jerry Springer TV. It wasn't so much about the wrestling. When you have like Undertaker on there embalming somebody, and then you have Goldust in a porta potty. You got people throwing each other off of bridges. As much credit as Stone Cold and McMahon get, as they should, it just had a lot to do that. It was more exciting to watch than PJ Walker versus, I don't know, TL Hopper, so to speak. But the era to me, when I go back and I watch classic matches, I'm not really watching a ton from the Attitude Era. I'm going back and I'm watching from the earlier 90s or the 80s or even before, or even in the earlier 2000s to mid to late 2000s. I usually go through those libraries before I touch anything from 98 to like 2000.
Right. I think because another thing, my favorite two wrestlers at that time were Shawn and Bret, and both of them, like Bret moved to WCW and Shawn, he got injured. That kind of I was a bigger fan of WCW because my favorites they were wrestling there, so I'm not sure if it makes sense.
No, it does. And I think once Brett and Shawn left, I think my next favorite became The Rock. I was into him as a heel. I liked him
Right.
better as a heel. And then I became a big Triple H fan, which is kind of funny because I'm not really a Triple H fan at all anymore. But I totally understand what you're saying. And in '96 too, after Brett left, I transitioned to WCW. It just was more interesting to me. They had just got Nash and Hall, so they were pulling a lot of
Right.
WWF guys. And I thought the production and everything, their show just stood out more to me. So that's kind of when I transitioned to WCW. And then I went back in about '97 when WWF was really putting on some great shows, some of their best Raws.
Yeah, it is my favorite year of all time, like
Mine,
1997.
yep, mine too.
Especially the main event. I like the maybe the mid card and the lower card. It wasn't that great, but the overall show, like the Hart Foundation and Austin would start the show with the promo. They will have a great main event. It was quite fun.
And it was still grounded in enough reality to where it kind of became a little ridiculous, a little more in '98 with like Inferno matches and some crazy stuff. But yeah,
What?
the card, the mid card. I will say in the Attitude Era, one thing that they did well, and they took like all the mid card talent and they all had a story. Even
Right.
if the matches weren't that memorable, they all had their own like place in the card where they were interesting. Even down the guys like Crash Holly and stuff were entertaining to watch. So
Right.
yeah,
What did you think about Owen in the Attitude Era? Like, what was your favorite phase of him? Was it the Black Heart, or when he joined the Nation of Domination? Then he had the tag with Jarrett. What did you think about him?
I really liked the Black Heart run, and it had a lot of potential, but it kind of got cut short. He had the short little match with Shawn,
Right.
and was kind of fodder the Triple H to get Triple H over, and
Yep.
then he kind of regulated, lower to the card. I think it had a ton of potential, but I don't know, who knows, politics or whatnot. Maybe they didn't believe in Owen and being the top guy or one of the top
Right.
guys. That I thought he would have been a great opponent for Austin with Owen as a heel, but Austin probably had reservations after the injury that he had. Maybe working with Owen,
Yep.
I'm not. But my favorite time from him in the Attitude Era was around the time he was working with guys like Dan Severn and Ken Shamrock.
Yep.
I enjoyed the Lions Den match. I'm surprised they haven't tried to pull that one out and dust that cage off for a guy like Brock Lesnar. It was
Oh,
always an
yeah.
interesting match.
Yeah, that's actually a great take. I agree.
But my favorite match from Owen from the Attitude Era was the one with Edge. I think
Yeah,
it
me
was that breakdown, maybe in your house
right,
breakdown. That was a great match, and it's a shame to know all the talent that he could have worked with because when Owen was motivated, he was as good as anybody they had.
right. And if you remember, like in the Royal Rumble 1998, he got a huge ovation, and Mike Tyson was marking out like, I think they really got something with Owen, and as you said, they didn't capitalize on him. Although the WrestleMania match with Triple H was quite fun.
No, that wasn't a bad match, but that feud was never designed for Owen to get over. It was designed for Triple H to get over, unfortunately. So.
That's that's true. Let's like go back and talk about the new generation era. I know like maybe business wise it wasn't that hot, but as a wrestling style with the 1 2 3 kid with Sean and Bray, I think it was my favorite era when it comes in in-ring performance. How about you?
I think a lot of fans, and myself included, you kind of tend to gravitate to the era where you started watching, and that's when I started watching in early 1992.
Right.
So for me, it was what I always have like a fondness for that era because that's when I started watching. But in going back, when I go back and watch a lot of the classic pay-per-views, they were for the most part really good. And the difference between wrestling now and then is Raws were kind of built. They weren't designed like they are today, where it's a 3-hour show to have WrestleMania caliber matches on it. It was designed to get guys over to build to the pay-per-view for a big match. And I miss that in wrestling today. Where with wrestling today, you have 3 hours of Raw, you have 2 hours of SmackDown, another 2 hours of NXT, NXT UK, 205 Live.
Right.
I could go on and on. AEW, New Japan, MLW, etc. Whereas back in the past, it was an hour Raw, and you had a weekend show, and half of the weekend show was a recap. It wasn't even always matches. So it made when you had a great big match where you had like a guy like Bret Hart and you took a Razor Ramon and they faced each other, it was more fun to me to watch. It was more anticipation. Whereas today,
I
like if
agree.
Bret Hart was wrestling today, he'd wrestle 40 matches a year on Raw probably, and they'd probably be 15, 20-minute matches. Whereas in
Right.
1994, his best year, he probably had like 5 Raw matches and very few. And that's the difference of what I miss in wrestling. It's just, it was so, it's overexposed today, whereas in the past, it just seemed a little more special when you finally got a good match.
That's true. I agree with that. But that's the nature. I think the Monday night era changed that. Like everybody was trying to compete to putting main events calibers and those and these shows at least.
Yeah.
Uh, so tell us about you. When did you start watching wrestling?
I started watching in early 1992. My sister and her friend, my sister, she's about 3 years older than me, and she was a wrestling fan before me. So they started watching, and then I just started to watch with them, and that's how I became a fan. And they were Shawn Michaels fans. They bought hook, line, and sinker into the whole sexy boy gimmick. They thought he was
Right.
cute. Take Shawn's theme song. That's how they felt about Shawn Michaels. So I immediately like I
Sorry
can't like
to,
what my sister likes.
it's quite funny because my two sisters were watching as well, and Sean was their favorite as well.
I think he was all the young girls
Yeah, he
wrestling
was
fans' favorite.
flamboyant.
But that's
Right.
kind of why I gravitated toward Brett because I'm like I can't like what my sister likes. I'm gonna like the opposite guy, at the
Right.
Sean's biggest rival. So I think that's kind of how I started to become a Brett fan. Also because he was on top of the card at the time, and so I'm like, oh, he must be the best guy. And it wasn't until years later where I really appreciated how good he was, not just because the announcers were telling me he was a great wrestler.
Right.
But that's when I started watching, and as we were talking about the other day, I went through that wrestling data site, and I found the first show that I went to, and I think my first memory I have, it was a house show in Warwick, Rhode Island, my hometown, and it was called the Warwick Musical Theater, which was a cool venue because it only held about 2,000 or 3,000 people, and the upper row only had about 3 rows, so you're pretty much on top of the ring. There's not a bad seat in the house, which is really cool.
That's awesome.
And the main event, it was a horrible card. I actually printed it out here. Let me show you this card.
Yes,
We have
please.
the Genius versus Bob Bradley, Virgil and Brooklyn Brawler, Kamala and Jim Brunzell, which I never knew I saw Jim Brunzell wrestle in person, so I went back and looked at this. Boss Man and Nails. I had a chance to see the legendary Nails in person.
That's awesome.
Animal and Bo Beverly, but a main event that made it worth it. It was Shawn Michaels and Randy Savage, and this says they went 22 minutes. So my
Wow.
first memory is Randy Savage's theme song playing. That's all I really remember from that show, but it stuck with me.
That's awesome, man. I wish I got the chance to see Randy Savage.
I went back and I watched that match. I think it was from one of the Coliseum videos. It was in the UK. I watched it yesterday. It was such a good match. Those two would have had tremendous matches as the years went on. It's too bad.
Was it the one where it had Miss Elizabeth in it?
Miss Elizabeth and Sherry, it was a good dynamic to the story of the match. It actually really added to it.
I love that match.
Yeah, I think it was on Sean's DVD too, if I'm not mistaken. It was a good one.
Yeah.
I know Savage wanted to work with Sean. According to Lanny Poffo, who used to have a podcast. I think Savage had a whole storyline and plan where he wanted to work with Sean and really sort of elevate him, but I guess they just weren't using him primarily as a wrestler for whatever reason. Which even back then, I mean, he stood out to me, and I wasn't too educated about the actual in-ring when I was like 6 or 7, but I knew, like, this guy's a star. Why is he announcing? I never understood it.
That's right. And I know, like, we both love WrestleMania 9. You told me that was the first pay-per-view you ever saw. Uh, for me, what I enjoy about the pay-per-view, like the look of it, it looks quite
Right.
different with the theme and in the Caesar Palace environment. I just love the feel of the show.
They did a good job dressing up that stadium because if you look at the stadium, like standard pictures of it, it just looks like a tennis court with bleacher seats. There's nothing to it, but they did a good job dressing it up.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why I really like that show, because the atmosphere of being outdoors and the first outdoor WrestleMania.
Right.
But the reason that's one of my favorite shows is because it was the first pay-per-view that I ever watched. I think my uncle got the tape from a friend, and we watched it the next day, which was cool because we were never really allowed to watch the pay-per-views. My parents, not because they had anything against wrestling, they didn't care, especially back then where it was more family-friendly. Like, they had no reason for me not to watch it.
Right.
But they just didn't want to buy the pay-per-views for us. So we would watch so many of them scrambled up when you used to be able to tune to the channel and you could hear it like it was a radio show, but you couldn't watch it. It was all scrambled up. But for years, I would watch Royal Rumbles and WrestleManias and whatnot, just scrambled up like it was a radio show. We'd watch Royal Rumbles and we'd write down who's coming out next and who got eliminated so we could follow what's going on. But that's why I like that WrestleMania for that reason. And it had some good matches on it. It wasn't the best, but it had some good athletic matches on it.
I love the Head Shrinkers versus the Steiner brothers matches. It is one of my, probably the best, maybe after where we had the Ronda Rousey debut, maybe that is the best tag team match of WrestleMania, at least the non-TLC stuff. But for a long time, it may be the best tag team match on WrestleMania.
That was a really good match. I remember that spot where Steiner looked so dangerous where he fell to the outside. He almost broke his neck. Do you remember that part of the match?
Right, that is crazy.
I don't think it was planned to happen that way, but it looked good anyway. Unintentionally looked good. But I like that tag match. I think other tag matches, I put that up there with I like the Dream Team one at WrestleMania 2 against the Bulldogs.
Yes.
I like the Hart Foundation and the Nasty Boys. And then the Edge and Christian matches were always good. So, but that's one of the best WrestleMania tag matches, like traditional, just no nonsense, straight up tag team matches.
I agree with that. Then, so what was your first pay-per-view you ever attended?
It was the WrestleMania 10.
Wow, yes.
And I wanted to go the Royal Rumble that year because it's like 15 minutes down the road from where I am right now in my hometown. It was so close in Providence, Rhode Island at the Civic Center. It's now called the Dunkin' Donuts Center. But I wanted to go to that show, and for whatever reason we didn't. So I probably whined to my parents that I want to go. You got to make this up to me. I missed this
Right.
show. So we ended up going to WrestleMania, which was a few months after that, which was such a special show.
Before talking about that show, like how did you guys back then manage to get tickets? Like, were your parents going to go to the box office and actually buy the tickets before several months? How easy was it to get tickets?
It was harder toward the Attitude Era because I remember I wanted to go to WrestleMania 14, and that show sold out in like 30 seconds or something. It was crazy. It sold out so fast. As soon as tickets went on sale, you called and you couldn't get them. But back in
Sorry,
the day,
was it WrestleMania 14 you were saying?
that's when tickets were really hard to
Oh,
get. But
okay.
for in the new generation era, we would go to Ticketmaster, which was in like Sears stores actually. They had a Ticketmaster, so you just go in there and you order the tickets. They weren't as hard to get back then. Toward
Right.
the Attitude Era, it became really hard. They'd sell out so fast.
So did you go with your sister and your parents as well, or was it just your?
I think I went with my dad. No, I went with my dad and my uncle for that show.
Were they wrestling fans as well, or they're just like taking you to the show?
My uncle, not so much. He was kind of just tagging along. My dad likes it. He more falls into the line and he likes the comedy of wrestling. Like his favorite was Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler used to crack him up as a heel. So my
Right.
dad would always watch wrestling with me, but he's not a real hardcore fan of it. But he would watch it with me every week, and he liked all the heels. He liked none of the faces. He liked all the heels.
How old were you like in 1994?
I was probably 9 for that show.
So I envy you because you was live for my favorite wrestling match of all time, Bret versus Owen. Like when you was live at that show, like while watching, did you know you are watching like one of the greatest matches of all time actually? And you have the Razor versus Shawn match. Tell us about the experience being live in like in a show that had these two awesome matches.
At the time being 9, I don't know if I appreciated just how good the match was, but I love the storyline, the brother versus brother storyline. I was so bought into that, as was the audience. So just as a story, I knew it was a good match. They were telling a good story. I didn't totally understand wrestling like I do now, to where I could really appreciate the in-ring work and how it really reflected the storyline. But even back then, I knew that was a special match, and it really stood out to me. Even after I left the show, that was my favorite match. Was the opener. As good as the ladder match was, and as much as a spectacle as it was, I liked the opening match even when I was 9. It stood out more to me. I liked the drama of it. But the ladder match was a spectacle too. I mean, when you're watching something like that, and it's pretty much the first one on mainstream film.
Right.
It was such an incredible match to watch. But I also like the main event with Yoko and Brett too. Going back now, it's an okay match. It's not a tremendous match, but back then I was super into it. But the Brett versus Owen match is what I took from that show. Even back then, it was my favorite match.
You know, like Brett always says, like in New York, it's kind of he had his fans base, and I really felt it even like when I was there on WrestleMania last year. I was hanging out like with all wrestling conventions and being on the weekends, as you know, there are a lot of things going on, and I was amazed by the amount of people wearing Heart Foundation and Bret Hart shirts. I was telling myself, huh, maybe like it's true. Like New York, they really love Bret Hart.
Yeah.
Even comparing to the current stars, I think people like the number one shirts worn during WrestleMania. It was a Bret Hart shirt.
Even when I went to WrestleMania 20 in 2004, before they were letting people into the arena, they were chanting the "We want Brett, we want Brett." And I think during the Goldberg and Lesnar match, they were chanting that too. Although they were chanting for everybody during that match, but Goldberg and Brock Lesnar. But Brett's always had a really strong following in New York. Even in 1997, the show they had where I think he fought Goldust in the main event. This was probably like in September. I think
Right?
it was a show where Austin stunned Vince for the first time.
Yeah.
He was the heel, but they were chanting him in that match over Goldust. So he always had a really good, strong showing in New York, which is why I think in 2010 when they had that house show match, he did the second rope elbow for that audience just to give something back to them for all their years of support, which I wish we saw on TV during that run. It's too bad. But
Right.
just the fact that he could do that after a stroke with 2 knee replacements is pretty impressive.
Yeah, actually, I rewatched like there was a clip like on Twitter, and Harry and Nettie and TG, I think they didn't know about it and they popped up when they saw it. It was quite cool.
It looked good too. It looked like classic Bret Hart. It was fun to watch. Heath Slater. It's funny how Heath Slater was sort of Bret's like he was paired with Bret in that all those house show matches that they had. It was kind of funny.
Right.
He must have been a safe wrestler, I guess, to put him with Bret being high risk with the stroke and whatnot.
Yeah, and what an honor for them, for these guys, like to be in the ring with Bret Hart. I am sure they were inside them big fans and they were so happy to be just in the ring with them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Must have been a good experience. I wish we could have seen that on one of the pay-per-views since they have like 25 pay-per-views a year. It's too bad we don't get to see
Yeah, that's true.
a big show, but
And as you were saying, you was as well, you attended WrestleMania 20. How did you like this show? I think it was quite well received, especially with the main events.
I really enjoyed the show. I think I liked it better than 35. I didn't hate 35, but I liked WrestleMania. WrestleMania 10 is still the favorite one I went to. 20 is the second favorite. Um,
Right.
Favorite match from that show would be the main event, but it's always has such a dark cloud over it because
Right.
Chris Benoit. It's too bad because that would be thought of as one of the greatest WrestleMania main events of all time
Yeah.
or matches, period. But now it's kind of just erased from history.
Right.
Um,
What
but the
is what
angle. Oh, go ahead.
sort of what is your take on the Chris Benoit situation? Because for me, he was like my first phase of watching wrestling. Hogan was my favorite. Then it was Bret, and then Benoit. And there are a lot of takes about it. Like some people, they can't watch his matches. What is your take about the whole Benoit things? Like, can you go back to watch his matches and
I can. It doesn't. I think about it. It's still in your head of what happened, but I
right?
could go back and I could appreciate his matches because another match that I saw in person when I went to the Royal Rumble in 2003 in Boston, that was one of the best matches I've ever seen. I
Amazing.
put it right there with Bret and Owen between him and Kurt Angle. So I
Yep.
could still go back and appreciate the matches, but I just think they said he had the brain of an 80-year-old with the dementia or Alzheimer's from so many concussions in
Right.
CT. So I really think between a mixture of whatever illegal substances or whatever he was ingesting into his body
Right.
and years of concussions, I don't think that was based on what everybody says. Obviously, I never
Yep.
knew Chris Benoit, but I think just something just snapped in his head and
Yes.
whatever happened that day happened, sadly. But I
I
could
was
still watch
think
matches.
I was thinking that way, but they had this documentary, The Dark Side of the Ring, and I was watching the Benoit piece, and an information I didn't know about, like he committed the murder over 3 days, so that's why it wasn't a snap. I think it took over 3 days, so it is what it is. I think they are having the Owen Hart piece this coming Tuesday.
I like the series. I haven't seen the Benoit episode. I just watched the Road Warriors one yesterday,
Right.
actually. It's a really good series. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, I know the Owen one. I just watched or I listened to the Talk is Jericho podcast, and he had
Yep, I
Martha
did.
Hart on there, which was rare to see because you haven't heard much from Martha Hart in the past 20 years. So it was actually a pretty good interview. You should check it out. But I'm looking forward to watching. I think it airs Tuesday.
That's right. I've listened to it. It's a quite good listen, but I'm not sure I'm going to see the documentary. It gives me a negative vibes more than a positive vibe, so I try to avoid these things,
Yeah,
especially in such situation.
I wish they could remember Owen's career at matches and just tell stories of his pranks instead of. We all know what happened when he passed away. I mean, you know,
Right.
so the documentary is going to be primarily focused on that, I think. Hopefully not, but yeah, I agree with that. I'd rather them come out with the true compilation of Owen's great matches and memories and funny stories. The one they came out with a few years ago was just, it could have been so much better. But I think they were sort of handcuffed because Martha probably didn't
Right.
want her involvement or her name on it.
Tell us about like your I guess let's say reappreciation for Shawn Michaels' heel work. You've been telling me you've been watching a lot of Shawn's on early 90s. What do you like about what about him at that time?
I've been watching a lot of Shawn from '95 and in the early '90s, and I actually think I prefer his early '90s singles run. I liked how he's a little more character based, and I thought Sherry was such a good complementary piece to his character and added a good
I love
dynamic to matches on the outside. I liked that about him, and I liked how he worked a little bit slower. In '95, he had great matches. Don't get me wrong. The one with Jeff Jarrett, for example, in '95 is one of
Yeah.
my favorite matches ever. But I like this a little bit slower work that he did in the early '90s and a little more heel. He was a little bigger too. I didn't he get in trouble for steroids in '93 and got
All
suspended.
right.
I could see that. But I like his '95 work too. But I have an appreciation for his early heel work. And there's something about watching a guy that becomes one of the best of all time, just watching him earlier in his career sort of develop and get experience. So it's fun to go back and watch those
Any
matches.
standout matches of him, like for people, would recommend?
Well, I really like the Macho Man one that I watched that we just
Yep,
talked
I
about.
love it.
That one was really good, and I also think the Survivor Series '92 match with Brett is really underrated.
Right.
Anything with Marty Jannetty was good. The Raw match they had was better than the Royal Rumble match. I think was it Marty Jannetty? Isn't there a story he was drunk or something for that match or
Yeah,
something? It's too bad. Marty Jannetty was
it's a
always so
great match.
talented. He can never get his act together.
Hey, did you have a chance to see that Jimmy Snuka match I've sent you?
Which one was that?
It's from 1992, January against Sean.
I haven't. I got to check that out. I'm actually looking forward to watching that. Yeah, I got to check that out.
All right, it is actually a great match. Like you wouldn't expect Jimmy Snuka at that time to have a great match, but for some reason it worked out between these two.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Yeah, that should be an interesting one to watch. I know Jimmy Snuka in that. It was kind of a hit. It wasn't the same Jimmy Snuka back then, or in the early '90s, like his match with the Undertaker.
Right.
So, I trust your opinion, so I'm gonna have to watch that. I'm looking forward
It is
to
a
it.
quite fun match. Another match, like we spoke about, it was against Virgil in one of the Coliseum videos. It
I did
was,
check that out after you mentioned it. Yeah, it was good.
it,
Surprisingly
wa-
good.
oh, did you watch it?
I did. Yeah.
Right. I think it was better than the Bright Virgil series. Would you agree?
I think it was a little bit too. I would agree. Although I wish Brett and Virgil had a little more time in that match because they were having a pretty solid match, but it was pretty short.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of Brett, I think you had a little project like writing about the most underrated or hidden gems Brett matches.
I've been going back on the network and online and trying to dig through because I feel like I've seen pretty much every match that's filmed, but I haven't apparently because there's still quite a bit. A lot of the Heart Foundation matches, like with the Rougeaus, that are really good. I watched the match between Brett and Danny Davis the other day, which was actually surprisingly pretty good. It told a good story where Danny Davis is sort of this just chicken shit, like not even wrestler, like former referee, and just trying to out trick Brett. And it was a surprisingly pretty good little match.
I
But
haven't
yeah,
seen it. I haven't seen this match.
and then the other one I watched the other day that we talked about was the one with Bulldog in '92 before SummerSlam.
Right.
I had never seen that one before. I think you said it was released on a DVD though. I didn't know that.
Yep. It is the unreleased DVD.
And you would tell me I think they weren't Brett wasn't happy with that match. I thought it was pretty good. I don't know. The crowd was a little flat, but
I really liked it. I think in his book he said it didn't work out, but I really like this match. Did you watch the Lenny Poffo match as well?
I've seen that. I remember we were talking about that not too long ago. I watched that in the past, and I remember it being pretty good.
Right.
I always liked Brett's heel work back then. I always actually preferred. If I was to watch Brett as a heel, I love his mid '80s heel work. His singles matches, like with Ricky Steamboat and back, it was a different style to what he did in '97, which was primarily like working the leg and whatnot. I always liked the mid '80s heel Brett.
Right. He was quite aggressive, Like really, you can feel his aggression and intensity.
There was another one I watched the other day too. I can't remember the guy's name. It was one of the Samoan wrestlers. Where it was a long match too, like 15 minutes. It was heel Bret Hart from the mid '80s. I can't think of his name right now. It'll come to me later. We'll talk about it.
Was
But it
it
was a really good match.
Samu or one of the uh, either was it Haku or Samu, right? The Islanders.
It wasn't one of the Islanders. It was somebody else. It's gonna bother me. I'm gonna think of it when we get off of this interview, and then I'm gonna text it to
Right.
you. But that was a good match. It was like 15 minutes long. It was pretty good.
You know, Rainy was like talking how you started to like have another appreciation for Shawn Michaels. For me, a wrestler that I wasn't quite high when I was watching him, The Undertaker, you know, the gray Undertaker era. Like, I really hated him back then because I found his matches slow and boring. But when I grew up lately, I started to rewatch some of his stuff and I said, man, he's like he's quite good, like really playing the character like to perfection. And I really started to like his performance, like the zombie stuff and how suddenly, as he was saying in his documentary, he was going really slow and suddenly he will hit a quite
See a
fast.
burst of energy, yeah, in the match.
Right. I really started to really like Undertaker, like early Undertaker.
No, I agree too, and it's actually more fun to go back and watch it now because I think wrestling is so fast; it's almost too fast that you could go
Right.
back and you could watch early Undertaker, and then he's so slow and methodical, and then like you said, he'll just turn it on. It'll just be fast moving in the match, where he'll do a leaping clothesline or just something really impressive for a guy his size. So yeah, his work. There's a lot of hidden gems too. There's a one with Bam Bam Bigelow I watched a few weeks ago, which I wish they could have got a more of a high caliber match because that would have been a they had pretty good chemistry in that short match that they had.
I love Bam Bam, like such a quite he has a quite unique look and he's a truly great wrestler. I totally love him.
Me too. I've always been a big fan, so hopefully he goes into their Hall of Fame someday. We'll see.
Right. I'm not sure if you heard about it, but WWE is reintroducing In Your House pay-per-view in one of their NXT takeovers. And man, I was like, I really loved In Your House back then when I was so happy whenever I go to the video store and get uh, one of these In Your House. What was some of your favorite In Your House matches and pay-per-views?
I always liked the first match of the first In Your House with Brett and Hakushi, which I just watched the other day. I saw it on the network, and I'm like, this is kind of random. It was actually no on WWE.com. I'm like, why is this on here? This is pretty
I
random.
think it was its anniversary or something.
Yeah, it's the 25th anniversary. I'm like, oh, okay. So I went back and watched it, and I love that match. I actually like it a little better than their Raw match, which was also really good.
Oh, really?
The fans are so into everything they do, and it just slowly builds to the high spots at the end, which for the time, like nobody was really doing that in WWF other than maybe
Right,
Shawn or 1, 2, 3 Kid. So I love the finish of that match too. It was just a
yes,
really good match, really logical. Like the part we were talking about the other day after the 360 clothesline where Hakushi's selling, like where he's knocked out, and Brett's lifting him
right,
up and his head's like dead weight, and then he's draping him over the ropes and he's like knocked out. Just little stuff like that I miss in wrestling today.
right.
Just small details that really stand out in a match. I like that one. I like Shawn and Jeff Jarrett from In Your House 3, is it?
It's In Your House too. I think it's one
Two?
of my
Okay.
favorite Shawn Michaels matches ever.
That was such a good match. I also love the whole thing with Jeff Jarrett with the whole storyline of the roadie singing his song back
Right,
then. That was like stuff that my dad would like too. He'd always get a kick out of that. That was what. So there are fans out there for all the fans today that sort of crap on stuff like that. There is an audience for stuff like that. Not if the whole show is like that, but like certain elements of the show, there's
part of
definitely
it,
audience.
definitely.
I like the Pierre Lafitte and Brett match. Maybe that's In Your House 3. I'm thinking of.
Right.
That was such a good match. The one with Bulldog and Brett from
Yep.
In Your House 5. Brett had a lot of good matches in Your House shows.
Sean
Um,
and Owen had a pretty good match where Sean comes off the ceiling.
I remember that's one of the ones you sent to me years ago, and I had never seen it, which was really right before WrestleMania 12, right?
Right.
That was a good match too. I wish they could have wrestled a little more than what we got. I mean, they had maybe 3 or 4 televised matches, right, that were filmed.
Yep. Man, I think Sean in 1996 had probably the best title reign ever. Like he had
I would agree.
the Iron Man match followed by the Diesel match, the Mankind match, the Vader match. Then he had the Sid matches. He was on fire.
He was. Everything was a 4-star match essentially, and he wrestled on Raw quite a bit that year too.
Yep.
They showcased him a lot. I think he got burnt out toward the end. I
Yep.
think he's happy to drop the belt at the end. He's probably tired. But yeah, that was
Right.
one of the best runs ever. I would agree. And I love the match where he won the title too at WrestleMania. It's my all-time favorite match. It's the Iron
Oh,
Man match.
really?
I think it's been called so overrated today by a lot of fans that it's become an underrated match. I just love everything about the match. It's my favorite match to watch back.
It is like a wrestler's match because I've noticed most of the wrestlers they would say it's their favorite wrestling match of all time. If you remember, if you I think the WrestleMania 20 DVD came out and the wrestlers started like to vote for their favorite match and Ric Flair was presenting the 1 hour
I think I
series
remember. Yeah.
and the wrestler chose this match as their favorite of all time.
Just everything was so logical. You couldn't see through anything in the match. It all looked so good and legit. Um, it was just flawless. Like the execution, their timing in
Right.
the match, being able to pace a match with no faults, which really kind of limited the excitement. But they got the fans into it toward the end. And I even love the first 20 minutes that a lot of people don't like because they're so conditioned for every match to be like a Rey Mysterio match now, where it's so fast.
Yes.
I like the struggle of the exchange of holds and whatnot and the counters, and I'm even into that part of the match. So I just love it from top to bottom. I thought it was a great match.
It didn't feel so choreographed.
No,
Like that's a segue to our next topic. I know we talk a lot about AEW. To be fair, I like it. Like every Thursday for me, I can't watch it live because it's in the morning. But I would always choose AEW over NXT as a priority. But some of the wrestling, maybe I'm not sure. Maybe wrestling has passed the modern wrestling style has passed on me. I'm not, you know what I mean. But
yeah,
it doesn't feel so natural. Like I hate it when it feels like two people working together instead of against each other. What do you think about, let's say, we don't want it to turn it into the Jim Cornette show, but what do you think about the style of AEW?
AEW is kind of like such a bipolar show because they'll have certain aspects of the show that are like they're so logical and the matches are so
Right.
good and everything makes sense, and then you'll have another match like for example, I think Cody Rhodes, who I really like, I think he
I love
faced
him.
Joey Janela the other day, and didn't the match go like 15 plus minutes or
I
something like
hate
that?
this. Yes.
The logic of that, Cody Rhodes is a top guy. He shouldn't be going 15 minutes against a guy like Joey Janela, who's not positioned anywhere near the top of the
Right.
card. It's like there's this philosophy and psychology in wrestling now where every match needs to be a main event WrestleMania caliber match.
Right.
If you have a whole show like that, top to bottom, it ceases to be special and stand out to me, and that's
Right.
what I don't like about the show. But overall, I have been watching AEW more than anything else lately, really, just because I like the
Right.
alternative aspect of it.
No, I agree. Like if did you watch the last show of AEW?
I haven't seen this last week's. No.
Like an example of the things I hate, I think there was a tag match Kenny Omega and Matt Hardy versus the Inter Circle, the tag team from Puerto Rico. What are their names?
Oh, they used to be LAX, didn't they?
Yeah,
Oh,
or
what are they?
Ortiz
Or
and
Santana and
and
Ortiz.
Santana. And there is a spot where like Kenny Omega would perform a double bulldog on them, and the setup was like the two of them had to bow down forever for 10 seconds. Then he came to execute like the bulldog, which these things you would never hear, as we were say, like back in the 90s. There were fast-paced action, but you wouldn't had such sport that you would go, huh, like that's unreasonable or illogical. I get a
It's
lot
too
of these
staged,
things.
yeah. There's too much cooperation in a lot of the moves today, where I'm not a fan of that either. I still like wrestling to look a little bit like a struggle and at least pretend to be real, even though the cat's out of the bag and everybody knows what's going on now. It should still
Right,
pretend to be real. And it's not to say there's not a place for that in the card, but when the whole card is that, most of the show is like that, it gets so watered down for me and I lose interest. And the pacing too, where it's just so fast, it's like, the wrestlers, they're way better athletes today, clearly, but like the guys in the past made even a simple move means so much more. There was a reason and a logic for doing things, whereas today it's just all out, just do whatever spot to get the fans into it, I feel.
right. And I hate it, like, especially in some of the tag matches, they would totally throw the rules out of the book. Like in
Yeah.
the first half of the match, they would stick to standing in the apron. Then it will turn into a tornado tag match for no reason.
And if you listen to Jim Cornette, that's one of his biggest pet peeves is about the use of the referee. That is so true, though. If you watch the matches, it's like the referee has no authority in a tag match.
Right. Have
Yeah.
you watched Money in the Bank or
I watched the main event, which I actually have to admit I was ready to crap on this match. I'm like, this is gonna be stupid. But I actually was kind of entertained by it. I thought, given the circumstances, which are not normal right now, they
right?
kind of did the best with what they had. But with WWE today, it almost makes it unwatchable for me with the amount of camera cuts that they do in one match. It's like when you go back and you watch old wrestling, there's probably like 10 camera cuts in a whole match, whereas now I'll get 10 camera cuts in like 10 seconds. The camera
Right.
keeps switching angles. It almost makes it unwatchable for me. I just can't stand watching current wrestling, mostly in WWE, with the amount of camera cuts that they do in their matches. It's too overproduced. But I
Right.
did find the match kind of entertaining. It was a little similar to Orton and Edge, though, from WrestleMania.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know you loved that match with Randy Orton, where I didn't like
Yeah.
it. But tell us, why did you enjoy the match?
I was into that match because I just thought it just looked like a real fight. It probably went on a little too long. I think everybody could kind of agree with that. But it looked like a real struggle, and they looked like a fight. And it just told the story of there was a personal grudge there over what Orton did with his wife and whatnot. So into him. So I thought
Right.
they told a good story given their storyline. And I'm glad to see now that they're getting the chance to have just a more traditional style match. Because one of the best matches I've ever seen in person was at Vengeance 2004 between Edge and Orton for the
Right.
IC title. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yep. I
So I'm
love
glad to
it.
see they're getting a traditional style match because
Right.
Orton, when he's motivated, is as good as anybody around if you give him the right opponent.
Yep.
But I
He
think
like.
Orton's. Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think Orton, the biggest flaw with Randy Orton has been they gave him so much early in his career where they moved him to the main event so fast that he really had nowhere to go for a while. He had already reached the top so early. I think they should have did more of a slower build with him to the top. But I get why they pushed him as fast as they did. But I think that's kind of my one thing with Randy Orton that I see with his career. I think he was given a little too much too early.
No, I agree with him. Like even like he feels so confident. Like he picks his move. He's still old school. He would just like he would do only a suplex or he will take a headlock, and he's so confident.
Yeah, he's an underrated. He's one of those guys that you don't appreciate as much when he's around, but years after he retires, you're gonna appreciate him more. I think a guy like Randy Orton.
Let, let me end with two random questions. Like first, who would you say if you had the chance to watch three wrestlers to perform live? You didn't get the chance to see. Who are they?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd probably have to go back further to a guy like a Bruno Sammartino, just because he was like the top guy of his era. Um, Terry Funk in his
Yeah,
prime, and not so much the hardcore Terry Funk, which I enjoyed as well, but I would have liked to have
right.
seen Terry Funk more in his prime. That's a good question. Who's like another guy? Um, I would have liked to have seen Hogan in his prime. I mean, I've seen Hogan matches
Yeah.
after the fact. In his prime, at the top of Hulkamania, would have been cool to
Oh,
see.
which match have you seen of Hogan? Was it WrestleMania 20? Was he there or?
I'm trying to. He was on a show. It might have been a Raw or something. I remember I saw Hogan once. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I wish I saw him in his prime.
Right.
It would have been cool.
I think for me, two of my picks, you were lucky to see them live. I always wanted to see Randy Savage wrestle live, Hulk Hogan, another name, and the third name it's between either Owen Hart and Ric Flair.
Yeah, I've had a chance to watch Ric Flair a few times. Or he had some good matches from his return in 2001 to when he retired. You have to
Right,
dig through the catalog to find him a little bit, but he had some good matches. But I
right.
think the last one I saw of him in person, I think he teamed with Eugene or something at that Vengeance
Oh,
show.
right,
I forgot who they faced. Maybe like Jonathan Coachman or something silly like that. But Rick could even make matches like that entertaining to watch, even though he's
right.
clearly past his physical prime. He could still put on a good. He was a good showman.
And my last question, I would say, what are your top three favorite matches of all time?
Well, the Iron Man match that we talked about a little while ago. Um, I really liked the match between Rick. I'm sorry, Mr. Perfect and Nick Bockwinkel, the 60-minute match.
Oh, I love it.
I love that one. And I've always been a big fan, like most wrestling fans, of the WrestleMania 3 match with Randy Savage and Ricky
Right,
Steamboat. You can't go wrong with that.
right.
Those are three of my favorites. I also like the Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit match from the Royal Rumble of 2003.
Awesome. I love it. Like you mentioned, the Buckwinkle versus Kurt Hennig match. Uh, I really love this match. Like the pace was unbelievable for a 60 minutes. And I'm not sure if you know it. Like Nick was 52 years old in this match.
Right, yeah, and he still was physically, he could still go in the ring. You wouldn't know he was 52.
Right. I might go back and watch this match actually tomorrow.
Yeah,
That
check it
you
out. It
reminded me.
still holds up all these years later. It'll still keep your attention.
I love it. I love this match so much. Hey Ryan, it was a great conversation. Actually, it flew by. It's like we've been talking for almost 1 hour, and it felt like 10 minutes.
Oh, it did. Anytime. It was my pleasure to talk to you. Anytime you want to talk wrestling, you just let me know.
That's awesome, man. Thank you very much for your time and for accepting the interview with me.
Anytime. Take care, my friend.
Take care. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.